Here's something strange. A scientist can hand you a bone that's 10,000 years old and tell you not just that this person died, but that they were struck from behind, that they'd survived an attack years earlier, and that the arrowhead still lodged inside them tells you exactly what kind of weapon killed them. No witnesses, no written record, just bone. So how do you actually read a murder that happened before writing existed? It starts with timing. When a bone breaks while a person is still alive and the wound heals, you get a callus, new bone growth sealing the fracture, sometimes over years. That's ante-mortem trauma, and it proves something important. This person survived a violent encounter and lived to tell about it, or at least to carry the scar. A fracture that happens right around the moment of death looks completely different. The bone was still fresh, still full of collagen, so it bends and splinters the way green wood does, not the way a dry stick snaps. That's called perimortem trauma, and it's the signature forensic anthropologists are actually hunting for. Some of the clearest evidence isn't even a fracture pattern, it's an object. A stone point lodged inside a rib, a flint fragment fused into a skull. When archaeologists find a weapon literally still inside the bone, there's no ambiguity left to argue about. And location matters just as much as the object. A fracture on the front of the skull, especially paired with a broken forearm from raising an arm to block a blow, reads as a fight, face to face. Someone saw it coming. A wound clustered on the back of the head, especially if it's the same size and shape across multiple bodies, reads as something colder, an execution. That distinction turned out to matter enormously at a site in Germany called Halberstadt, roughly 7,000 years old. 9 skeletons, all but one male, no children at all, already unusual for a Neolithic mass grave. And Christian Meyer's team examined the skulls. 92% of the injuries were on the back half of the head. Not scattered, not random, standardized wounds, roughly the same size, delivered from behind or above. Isotope analysis showed these men weren't even local. Meyer's conclusion, this wasn't a battle, it was a controlled execution of outsiders. Now take that same forensic toolkit to a site that's been called the first battle in human history, Jebel Sahaba in Sudan, a cemetery roughly 13,000 years old, excavated back in the 1960s by Fred Wendorf. His original count found around 20 of the 59 skeletons showing signs of violence, already enough to call it humanity's oldest known war. In 2021, Isabel Krevker's team went back with tools Wendorf never had: microscopy, micro-CT scanning that can see fracture lines invisible to the naked eye. The new count wasn't smaller, it was bigger. 41 individuals, 67% of the sample, showing violence-related injuries, more than double the original figure. But here's the twist. More than a third of those people had both healed wounds and fresh ones on the same skeleton. They'd survived one attack and then died in another later one. That pattern doesn't look like a single decisive battle. It looks like decades of small recurring raids. More violence overall, just not the one big war the first battle label implied. Not every mass deposit of bones even points to combat. At Herxheim in Germany, archaeologists found the remains of an estimated 500 people. Some researchers think the true number tops 1,000, showing systematic cut marks, deliberately split skulls, and long bones broken open exactly the way you'd break an animal bone for marrow. Bruno Bolestin and his colleagues argue this is evidence of cannibalism, likely tied to a crisis at the end of a cultural collapse. Not war exactly, but violence and desperation braided together in a way that's still debated today. Then there are sites that look almost like a battlefield report. San Juan ante Portam Latinam in Spain, roughly 5,000 years old, at least 338 individuals, and a 2023 restudy led by Teresa Fernandez Crespo found violence-related injuries on nearly a quarter of them, 65 fresh wounds, 89 healed ones, and 52 arrowheads recovered at the site, several still showing impact damage. Almost all of the fatal wounds were on adolescent and adult males. This is one of the strongest cases yet for organized, sustained conflict in Neolithic Europe. Not a single skirmish, but something closer to a small war fought over time. And this isn't just a deep prehistory story. Jump forward to 1325 in South Dakota to a fortified village called Crow Creek. At least 486 people in a single mass grave, nearly the entire population, with scalping marks on almost every skull and healed wounds and embedded arrow points showing that some of them had survived earlier attacks before the massacre that killed them. Same forensic signatures, same underlying grammar of violence, just a different millennium. So how confident should we actually be reading all of this? Bioarchaeologists are honest about the limits. Soft tissue wounds, stabbing, strangulation, poison leave nothing on bone at all, so every count here is almost certainly an undercount. A single spectacular mass grave, precisely because it's dramatic and well preserved, can distort our whole sense of how violent an era really was, while the ordinary scattered deaths around it leave no trace we can measure. And one healed skull fracture on its own could be war, could be a fall, could be a domestic dispute. Only patterns across many bodies let researchers argue for something organized. That's exactly why the newest studies lean so heavily on more than just trauma counts alone. A 2026 study of a mass grave in Serbia found that over 70% of the dead were women and children, not the signature of a battle between armed groups, but of a massacre that specifically targeted the people least able to fight back. A 2025 study in France used isotope analysis to show that some victims of a Neolithic mass killing were locals, killed and dismembered as trophies, while others were captured outsiders, executed separately. Two different fates hidden inside what looked at first like one undifferentiated pile of bones. Ancient DNA is starting to do the same thing, showing not just that people died together, but whether they were related, whether they were strangers, whether the violence was random or precisely aimed. What's actually solid underneath all of that uncertainty is this: the bones don't lie about the moment they broke. Whether that moment adds up to a war, an execution, a ritual, or a single desperate act, that's the argument scientists are still having, one skeleton at a time.